When remote work started out as something that was becoming a reality, I was concerned about where this would end and where it was heading. I think it's here to stay in some verticals or some industries. And I think that as an employer, you've got to be willing to take the time, just like you would in any other HR challenge or technology challenge, to make sure you put the necessary resources to facilitate this new reality. But you also got to be willing to ensure that your employees understand that it's not a right or an entitlement. You got to lead by example, and you got to lead from the top. And then it has to be a deliberate management of your team members that's different than it used to be, because you used to just presume that everybody was going to be in office. Today, you have to figure out what element of the work requires people to be in office and what element of the work can function with people outside of office. You also have to consider how people work, because what I think people went a bit too far in 21 and 22 and early 23 was we painted the entire staff with the same brush. The reality is there are some people who work really well remotely and some who don't. And you've got to manage them according to their strengths. The competition for people is the problem. There are many employers who will accommodate the lifestyle choices of employees today that wasn't the case 3 or 4 years ago. So if you attempt to impose too stringent a policy or too stringent a set of rules on what governs remote working versus in-office working, you might find that you have a talent problem and that the talent will migrate to where the working conditions suit their style of work. I have a client in the services space who was very concerned about people working out of office and was very vocal about it internally within and among their staff. And he asked our team to give him some insight on whether or not remote working had affected the productivity of the team over the course of a 6-month period back in 2020. And interestingly enough, we found some really curious results. We found that for the most part, there wasn't a tremendous productivity impact at all, because the nature of that work was very output driven. So if you didn't do those outputs, your work would stop because the flow of work required certain outputs to be hit. But what we also found was that, to the point I was making earlier, there were some people who just weren't good in a self-governed work from home environment, and it stood out quite a bit. But there were measurements. So we were measuring work product per hour. We were measuring, in that case, billable hours versus unbilled hours. We were measuring total volume over the period of time when they were working in office versus total volume when they were working outside of office. And we were able to spot and identify trends, and in some cases, isolate where there were deviations or exceptions. I have clients who say all staff in on Tuesdays and Thursdays and at least one other day. I'm not sure that's the best approach, because it's implying that everybody fits into this same sort of standard of working and the same timeliness and timeline of working. And I think that they've had a lot of resistance that had they tried to achieve the same thing in a less command and control way, they might have actually gotten there, because it's actually not a bad idea to say our target is to have people in 3 days a week. Our target is to have 2/3 of the work remote and 1/3 in office, or vice versa. But to then legislate it in a prescriptive way that's one size fits all, most of the employers who I've seen adapt that approach, it hasn't worked well. The ones who've really made it work are the ones who allow people the flexibility, but if they're not productive or if they're having challenges with the quality of their work, we will actually mandate them that they have to work in office until they fix that particular element that's failing, and then be true to our word that when they fix that element that's failing, give them a chance to then try remote work again. But you've got to be flexible. Can't take it for granted anymore. When you think of the role of a CFO in any organization, they're the scorekeeper, and they're the results communicator. And so if there's a concern about the implications of remote work versus in-office work, there's a role for your finance team to put together information that allows you to assess and understand it. The longevity of the business requires all of the resources to be doing what needs to be done, and not entirely and exclusively what folks want to do. But also my message to employers who are trying to figure out, does it have to be all in office? Find the balance.